How to learn anything faster. Welcome to Psychology for People YouTube channel. Hey friends, today we're talking about learning. Now learning has been probably one of my main superpowers since I was very young, and learning how to learn is one of those meta skills that no one ever really teaches us, but that can have an enormous impact on our life in basically everything that we do. For example, when I was in school, I learned how to learn anything faster, and therefore I could study more efficiently, which freed up more of my own time to do the things like set up a side business. And these days, even though I don't have any exams to prepare for, learning is still a huge part of my life. And so in this video, I'm going to share 9 tips that I found really helpful that are evidence-based about how we can learn anything we want faster. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please subscribe now and become part of the Psychology for People family. Let's get started then. Tip number 1. Sharpen the axe. This tip is to sharpen the axe. Now this is from a quote that is attributed to Abraham Lincoln, where he famously said that if you gave me 6 hours to chop down a tree, I would spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. And he's really talking here about the power of preparation, and this definitely applies to learning anything as well. Let's say we are studying for an exam and we want to learn it a little bit better. Let's say we're trying to learn something like the guitar or chess or anything like that, something that's not related to studying. We should still spend a decent amount of time figuring out the meta learning behind what we're actually going to learn, like how we're going to learn a specific thing. For example, when I was learning how to play the piano by ear, I spent a decent amount of time on the Learn Piano subreddit, where people were explaining how to learn to play piano by ear, and just spending a little bit of time sharpening the axe before I really sat down to learn the thing really helped accelerate my learning process. Tip number 2. Use crutches. It is to use crutches to optimize our focus. Now whenever we're learning anything, it's really tempting to kind of learn it in the background, like practicing the guitar while watching TV or something like that. But obviously when we're fully focused on the things that we're learning, our brain learns the thing a lot better. And so I found a few different crutches or hacks that have been particularly helpful in helping me focus on things. One is the 5-minute rule, which is a general tip for productivity as well. The 5-minute rule says that we just have to convince ourselves that we're just going to do the thing for 5 minutes. And then after we've done it for 5 minutes, we're allowed to just not do it. But more often than not, I find that if we've been practicing the guitar or playing the piano for 5 minutes, I do then want to actually continue to practice. Another thing that's really helpful is just to chuck my phone away. I literally take my phone, I toss it onto the sofa or on the floor like a good tosser, and then I'm ready to focus and not be distracted with the things that I'm trying to learn. Tip number 3. Immersive learning. Tip number 3 is to find opportunities for immersion. So there's a great book called Ultra Learning by Scott Young, where he talks about his journey through learning languages and becoming fluent in a language in 3 months. And the key to that, as all language learners say, is immersion, just being as immersed in the language as possible. And the general principle here is that we learn best when we're in the environment where we're actually going to be using the skill. So for example, when I was learning how to do magic to become a close-up magician, yes, I was doing some practice in front of my webcam and in front of my mirror just to get the sleight of hand. But really, my webcam or mirror is not the arena in which I'm going to be performing. And so I made a point to try and perform magic for real people at parties as much as possible. Performing at parties helped improve my abilities in a way that just doing it in front of the mirror really wouldn't have done. Tip number 4. Find weak links. This tip is to figure out what are our weak links, and then use lots of drills to improve them. So if we used my medical field as an example, I had a few subjects that I was pretty weak in. Neurology was one of them. If you'd asked me what is the Galen-Barr syndrome, I'd have been like, oh god, I have absolutely no idea. I didn't even have a mental model for where it would fit into the subject of neurology. And so when it came to studying efficiently for my exams, I knew that I have to drill the things that I'm weakest on. And I spent just a whole day basically creating a 1-page syllabus with just neurology just focusing on that one subject. And just because I spent like 8 to 12 hours that day doing it, my area of weakness was no longer an area of weakness. And the question I would keep on asking myself every day when I was sitting down to study was, if the exam were tomorrow, what topic would I be the weakest in? And then I would just study for that topic. And this is really good because whenever we're learning or whenever we're studying, it's very tempting to just do the stuff that seems familiar to us. If we're studying for an exam, it's very tempting to open up the book to page 1, even though we already know what's on page 1. If we're learning the guitar, it's very tempting to just play through songs that we've already played before. But really, learning only happens when we're trying to fix our weaknesses and we're trying to operate at a decent level of difficulty. If something is too easy, we're not going to learn anything at all. And so if we want to maximise the learning and learn anything faster, we want to really hone down on what are the areas of weakness, what are the weak links, and how do we use drills to improve those as quickly as we can. Tip number 5, desirable difficulty. It is to test ourselves. Now this is a thing that in the world of studying is called active recall, but it also applies to the world of learning anything in general. Anyway, the idea behind active recall or retrieval practice is that we don't learn by trying to put stuff into our brains. We actually learn counterintuitively by trying to take stuff out of our brains. And so if you've had that experience where you've read something in a textbook or a website and someone asks you about it a few days later and you've completely forgotten about it, that's just because you haven't tested yourself on that knowledge. And the word testing has all those negative connotations because we think of testing as like a school thing, and we get graded and we get judged. But if we move towards thinking of testing ourselves as being a strategy for learning, everything becomes so much easier. That's why when learning to play the guitar, there's only so many tutorials you can watch before you actually start having to put it into practice. When you're studying for exams, there's no point reading the textbook and just summarising what's in the textbook. The point is you have to test yourself so that your brain has a chance to work to retrieve the information. And that is what really drives learning. And in the field of learning, there is this concept called the desirable difficulty concept, which basically just means something shouldn't be too hard. For example, if I were to try playing tennis against Roger Federer, it would just be too hard. I wouldn't really learn anything, but equally, if I were to try playing tennis against a 10-year-old who doesn't know how to play, it wouldn't be much fun. I wouldn't learn anything because the difficulty is at two different extremes. I want to be playing tennis against someone who is at my level or a little bit better than me, because that is the real area in which I'm going to be learning. And that's why having a coach, for example, is really good, because a coach can moderate the playstyle to be at my level and therefore I'm more likely to learn. That is desirable difficulty. And so whatever we want to learn efficiently, we want to apply this concept to try and make it a little bit more difficult. Learning is not supposed to be easy, it is supposed to be hard. Tip number 6, intense feedback. It is to get intense feedback as often and as quickly as possible. So feedback obviously is how we learn. We do something, we see that we're doing it wrong, and then we improve the thing. And again, feedback is one of those words that can seem a little bit unpleasant at times, especially if we're starting something where we're not sure of our own abilities. If we get constructive or critical feedback, that can really be a blow to our ego. If you're that sort of person that needs the ego massage, then at the start of learning something, what you need is praise and encouragement. For example, if I was just starting to learn how to sing and people would just give me critical feedback immediately, I'd probably feel bad and quit singing and think I am one of those people who just can't sing. If I were to start drawing and people say that's really crap, you should do something else instead, I'd probably feel pretty bad about it, and therefore it wouldn't help me continue on the journey. So I think at the start of a journey for most of us, we need an injection of positivity and enthusiasm rather than necessarily critical feedback. But if we do decide to switch gears and to start taking learning something seriously, we want to kind of avoid the praise and recognition aspect of it, which is unhelpful, and instead focus on the critical, constructive feedback. What can we do differently? Again, this is why having a coach is actually really helpful. Ever since getting a personal trainer, everything in the gym has improved for me. My biceps have gotten bigger. I'm one step closer to becoming an athlete because now I have someone who's there and giving me feedback on the things that I should be doing differently. It's a type of feedback loops. It's this type of feedback loop that encourages learning, whether it's for exams or whether it's for anything else in life. Tip number 7, overlearning. This tip is the concept of overlearning, which is that when we're learning something, we actually want to try and understand or learn it in more depth than we necessarily need to. And the idea here is to continuously be asking why a thing works the way it does. So for example, when I'm working as a doctor and I see senior doctors following guidelines and following a prescribed set of rules, and basically a flowchart for everything that they do, they have the view that all they have to do is memorise the guidelines or look them up when necessary. But then there are other doctors who try the understanding approach to medicine and think, okay, I know what the guidelines are that I should prescribe this drug, but I'm actually going to take a step further to figure out why that's the guideline. Why do they do that? What's the evidence around this? The doctor I want to be is a doctor who understands stuff from first principles and understands the rationale for doing stuff rather than just memorising the guidelines. This applies to music theory in the guitar as well. John Mayer talks about this a lot on his Instagram, that understanding of music theory is important instead of merely putting fingers in A, B and C positions to play a C7 chord. When you have that deeper appreciation of the reasons behind why things are the way they are, it just makes learning anything else in that particular sphere much easier and much more efficient. Tip number 8, spaced repetition. It's all about spacing. This is something in the world of study we call spaced repetition. Basically, there's a concept called the forgetting curve that was discovered by Ebing Health in the 18th century. And the forgetting curve is that whenever we learn anything, whether it's like a fact or a skill or whatever, we're just going to forget it, and our memory for it is going to decay over time. Because it's like our muscles, when we don't use our muscles are going to atrophy and they're going to get weaker. If we learn, let's say, a language when we were 5 years old, then we don't use it for the next 10 years, we're actually going to forget most of the language. But thankfully, we can combat the forgetting curve by using this concept of spaced repetition. This applies not just to exams, but to any other skill as well, which is that we repeat the thing at spaced intervals. So let's say I might learn a song on the guitar on day 1, and then I might repeat it again tomorrow, and then I might test myself on it again next week, and then next month, and then 6 months from now. And if I space my repetition of this thing enough, eventually playing that song is going to go into my muscle memory, and I won't need to practice it very much anymore to be able to play it whenever I want. And finally, tip number 9, teach what you learn. We often think we can teach something until we become an expert at it. But there's this concept that C.S. Lewis Cook talked about that I mention a lot called the curse of knowledge, which is that when we're trying to learn something, often we don't learn best from experts. We learn best from people who are just one step in front of us along that same journey. And certainly for me, I found that when I was going through medical school, my favourite lectures would be ones that were given by the medical students in the year above me, rather than those given by world-class Nobel Prize winning professors, because those guys were like old and really far removed from the things that I needed at the time. Whereas another medical student just 1 year above me was really helpful. And then when I started teaching medical students, when I started teaching guitar, when I started teaching piano, I found that anytime I try and teach something, it really solidifies my own knowledge, understanding and learning of the skill I teach, and that helps me learn better. This is our today's video. Let us know how you liked the video in the comment box below. Stay with us by liking, commenting and sharing the video. See you in another video. Till then, stay well, stay healthy. Thank you.